Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. I've been using the Alienware AW3423DW for about a year now. I published my review back in early April of 2022, and since then it has been my daily driver gaming monitor. In today's video, I wanted to give my thoughts on using a QD-OLED for a full 12 months. How's it been? Did some of the issues become more or less annoying over time? And of course, have I experienced any burn-in? Before diving into the details, I'll explain how I've been using the AW3423DW. In my studio here, I have two main PC setups. My workstation, which is where I write scripts, analyze data, and edit videos. It's positioned in my test systems. And then I've got my gaming PC, which is a dedicated setup for playing games. Over on Patreon and Float Plan, I have a studio tour showing these setups if you're interested or just need a bit more context. About a year ago, I moved away from the single all-purpose PC setup for work and play because the best hardware for each use case is a bit different, and that allowed me to pick the best monitor for gaming to use with my gaming PC. After reviewing the AW3423DW, that's what I picked. I really wanted to get into HDR gaming in a more significant way, and the DW being an OLED was the perfect choice for that. Few things to note here about how I've been using this display. As it's been my gaming monitor, I have primarily been using it for gaming. However, that's not the only thing I've been doing. I'd say it's been about a 70-30 split between gaming and web browsing. So 70% of the time gaming, 30% of the time browsing the web, watching YouTube videos in a split screen mode, managing my Steam library, and so on. I also don't have tons of time for gaming. Across the last year, I've tallied up my gaming time and it's been about 350 hours on PC, or roughly an hour a day. That's on the low side for me as well. I've moved house in the last year. I've built a new studio that you see here, which has taken up a lot of my free time. Point is, there will be people out there that have put in 1,000+ hours of screen time into the AW3423DW already quite easily. 4 hours of use a day over 365 days is nearly 1,500 hours of use, but that's not me. At best, I reckon I've used it for around 500 hours. I also have my gaming PC set up in a way that's optimized for PC OLED use, as I would recommend anyone does. This means in Windows I'm using dark mode, I have the taskbar minimized, and I've set the display to sleep after 5 minutes of inactivity. I haven't been trying to punish my monitor, I've been trying to use it in a realistic way, but I do have it set to 200 nits for SDR content, which is 80% of what the monitor can do best case. The question that everyone wants answered, I'm sure, is, have I experienced burn-in? The answer is no, but also maybe. It's a complicated situation and it's quite hard to describe, so let's break down burn-in on the AW3423DW. Practically speaking, I have not experienced burn-in. By that I mean when browsing the web, playing games, watching videos, or just using the monitor normally, my monitor has no noticeable burn-in artifacts. No navigation bars or icons have burned in whatsoever. It's not like I'm playing a game and there's ugly static burn-in masks of the Excel spreadsheets I've been viewing. The screen still looks excellent and clear across all use cases. However, if I look really closely, I can start to see the early effects of burn-in. When viewing a full screen mid-grey image, I can see an extremely faint vertical line down the exact middle of the screen. It's very, very difficult to spot, and I'm not sure I'll be able to capture it well on camera, but basically, it's most noticeable when viewing a grayscale RGB value of 50 or so. It's practically invisible above RGB 100 and below RGB 20. When looking at individual colors, it's invisible looking at full screen blue, almost impossible to spot with red, and difficult to see, though the most obvious when looking at green. I want to stress here that this is not obvious burn-in. I had to go hunting for this specifically when making this video. Without looking at these test images, I never would have noticed. Like I said, during normal usage, it's basically impossible to spot this vertical line, and it has no real impact on my usability of the monitor. With that said, it's an interesting and somewhat concerning finding. The cause of this faint burn-in, I believe, is side-by-side app usage in Windows. For example, let's say I'm running Chrome and Steam side by side. Straight down the middle of the screen is a white line, which is the outer edge of the apps joined together. As it's white, it's a brighter element that will wear the pixels more, and it's always in the exact same position. For example, even if I switch to the Steam and Chrome sides, that white line is still in the same spot, while all the other static navigation elements and things have swapped place. even if I only had one app opened snapped to one side, which I do quite often, there's still that white outer edge visible in the center of the screen. It's one of the most static elements on the screen during these periods of desktop use, and even in dark mode, it's not dimmed, it's bright white. It was also interesting to discover this faint burn-in is more visible viewing a green color than the other colors. This suggests the green subpixel has burned in slightly faster than the other subpixels, but it's hard to draw any strong conclusions here, as with my unit it's really not very noticeable. It's probably going to take at least another year of usage for any further effects to be seen. But what does concern me is that I haven't exactly been viewing heaps of desktop apps on my AW3423DW. All up, it's probably been only 150 to 200 hours of app usage in that side-by-side or snap configuration. That's a very low total number of hours, and I would suspect any sort of serious desktop use for even a few hours a day, let's say 600 hours over a year, would already be showing this sort of burn-in, perhaps to an even greater degree than I've seen. So I'd be interested to hear from other AW3423DW owners in the comments if that's the case, and also what sort of burn-in you're experiencing. What's also tricky is that I was an early adopter of this model, buying a unit from the first batch, which have firmware version M0B101. This firmware revision is dodgy and has plenty of bugs, unlike later units that shipped with M0B102. And there's no way to update it, as this display does not support user firmware updates. My only option here is to ship the monitor back to Dell and get them to update it, which I haven't been willing to do, and I think is an unreasonable ask from customers. The reason why I bring this up is firmware M0B101 has clear issues running some of the OLED panel maintenance features, in particular the pixel refresh and panel refresh. These are supposed to activate automatically after certain periods of use. For example, the pixel refresh should be run after every 4 to 20 hours of use, while the panel refresh should be run after 1500 hours according to Dell's manual. The monitor should automatically activate these features after use exceeds these thresholds when the monitor goes into standby, but that doesn't happen consistently with the initial firmware release. Often the monitor won't run the pixel refresher, or on next use I'll turn it on and it'll come up with a pop-up asking me to run the pixel refresher instead of running it during standby. And that can be pretty annoying, as when I turn on the monitor I want to use it, not wait around for 7 minutes while the pixel refresher runs, so I'll often just ignore the warning or force it not to run. So basically, it's hard to know whether my AW3423DW has been running these maintenance features on the schedule it should be. At the very least, the implementation is buggy. With that said, I did run the panel refresh feature manually, and it made little to no difference to the burn-in I described earlier. I wouldn't have expected this to activate automatically yet, as it's scheduled for every 1500 hours, but I ran it for science reasons for this video, and yeah, not much of a difference. The good news is that my unit is covered by 3 years of burn-in warranty at minimum. If the early signs of burn-in I'm seeing here progress to more obvious burn-in within the next 2 years, I will be eligible for a replacement under warranty. If it turns out the burn-in is caused by buggy firmware not running maintenance features properly, that's Dell's fault for not fixing those bugs and not allowing user upgradable firmware. Would be a harsh lesson for them to learn if it leads to more RMAs for burn-in than expected. However, at this stage, I wouldn't even remotely consider an RMA for burn-in, as it's invisible during at least my regular usage. Let's move on from burn-in now, as right now, for me, it is a minor concern. What I'm pleased to say is that I've been really enjoying this monitor for HDR gaming. It's perhaps even better than I expressed in my review, which was, I guess, already a pretty positive review. This QD-OLED panel is truly excellent for gaming, and after now playing a wide variety of HDR games on it, I'm convinced that high-end monitor buyers should be placing HDR at number 1 on their desired feature list. OLED also should be strongly considered due to its speed and dimming ability, but even if you get a full array locally dimmed LCD for HDR, I think you'll really be getting a significant upgrade with your monitor if that's something that you're not currently experiencing. What has been pleasing to see is that I've been able to confirm excellent levels of brightness across a large number of games. It's pretty typical to see around 1000 nits of real-world brightness for bright highlights in games. That has been the case across most major titles that I've played. Things like bright lights in Dead Space, the sun in The Last of Us Part 1, candles in Resident Evil 4, all of those elements are bright and look fantastic on this display. It's not a case where the QD-OLED panel can only hit 1000 nits in synthetic tests. I've actually gotten at my measuring tools multiple times and confirmed this sort of brightness in a dozen or more instances. Even brightness for larger screen areas is pretty good. Outdoor scenes and large windows can often be around 400 to 500 nits, which is very much sufficient to create that bright HDR experience while gaming. And this has been a huge step up in visual quality from the IPS LCD I was using previously. Same sort of resolution and size, only a small increase to the refresh rate, but it's moving from IPS to OLED. That has been all the difference. Much deeper blacks, proper HDR experience, better motion clarity. It's a huge upgrade in image quality. I think any buyer of an OLED gaming monitor will immediately be able to tell the difference between it and their old LCD, if that's what they were upgrading from. And it's not a subtle difference, it's very obvious, and at least in my opinion, I think it justifies the expense. Now, I did spend some time in my review going over the flaws with the AW3423DW and its QD-OLED panel. So after using it for a year now, I thought I'd rank these flaws in terms of their impact over the long term and how annoying I've found them. I've got 7 issues to rank, so let's get started from least annoying to most annoying. In 7th spot, I've got the input lag. As I noted in my review, the AW3423DW has a higher processing delay than other monitors. In practice, this is not something I've noticed. I'm not a highly latency sensitive competitive multiplayer gamer, so I really don't care about this flaw at all. Similarly, in 6th spot, I've got the lack of HDMI 2.1. Currently, I'm only using the display over DisplayPort and don't have any other devices attached, so I've got no use for the HDMI ports at all, let alone HDMI 2.1 ports. Maybe in the future I'd attach a console, in which case the lack of HDMI 2.1 might be annoying, but I don't really see myself doing this, so I don't see this being an issue. In 5th place, I've got the relatively low SDR brightness. I rarely use any monitor with SDR brightness set above 200 nits, so the AW3423DW being capable of only 240 nits is a non-issue for me. However, it is slightly more annoying than the other 2 issues I've mentioned in that if I was to change the location of this monitor to a brighter area, I might have required higher brightness. Realistically, this had no impact on my buying decision though. I guess I didn't really buy it, I bought it for the review, but you know what I mean. If I was buying this monitor, this wouldn't be a consideration. In 4th place, this is where the minor annoyances begin. I've got the fan noise here. This is something I can notice and annoys me slightly, but doesn't really impact day-to-day usage all that much. Usually, I'm playing games, so I can't hear the fan over game audio or even just my PC, but it does irritate me that the fan spins up at times for no reason and remains active while the monitor is in standby. While browsing the web, I can hear it, so ideally, this would have been fixed. As I'm using the monitor primarily for gaming and only the occasional amount of desktop use, the non-standard triangle RGB subpixel layout is mostly not an issue for my day-to-day usage. However, it is still something I can notice during the times I'm using this monitor for desktop app usage, and it's inferior to the IPS monitors I use daily for productivity work when it comes to text quality. So the subpixel layout I have in 3rd place as a minor to moderate annoyance. If a successor was released that didn't address this issue, I'd probably still be fine with it. In 2nd place, this is where we get to the moderate and major issues that definitely need to be resolved with a future version of this monitor. Here I have the lack of user upgradable firmware. As I've talked about previously, the initial firmware release is buggy, and these bugs were fixed in a revision that is currently inaccessible to me as I can't update the monitor. Things like the maintenance features not activating properly, the monitor having difficulty waking up from sleep, and some labeling issues in the OSD all do annoy me to a small degree on a daily basis, and it's frustrating that I can't easily fix this by applying a firmware update I know exists. I think it's crucial for a product at this price point to support user updates. It may never be necessary to use this feature, but at least if something does come up, if there's some unique or rare bug, it would be fixable with little hassle. The number one issue with the AW3423DW and a consistent source of frustration for me is the screen coating. This is definitely something Samsung needs to address with the 2nd generation of QD-OLED gaming panels. The way this panel both reflects diffuse ambient light and creates mirror-like reflections really limits its usability in brighter environments. So I've had to specifically optimize my gaming setup to reduce reflections, and I end up gaming in dim lighting or a dark room most of the time, for example with lights off. Had this screen used the coding and structure of LG's WOLED panels, whether glossy or matte, it would have been much more usable in even moderate indoor light, which is sometimes my preferred way to game during the day, like on a weekend in the middle of the day, for example. I still don't think this is a total deal breaker, but it's the most glaring issue with the panel. It just isn't great to have an OLED where deep blacks are a key feature, only to have that feature let down by raised blacks in brighter rooms due to coding issues. If a future version did solve this problem, I'd say that alone would get me to consider an upgrade. So those are my thoughts on using the Alienware AW3423DW for the last year. I genuinely really like this monitor and I think it's excellent for HDR gaming, and the good news is that many of the issues with it don't affect my use case substantially. I will be continuing to recommend QD-OLED monitors to high-end monitor shoppers, as I think the experience you get is among the best on the market, especially for gamers interested in stunning, high-quality visual experiences using HDR. There are a few concerns though, such as the very early stages of burn-in after not a huge amount of hours, firmware annoyances that can't be fixed as the monitor doesn't support firmware updates, and the number one issue of the screen coding. It'll be very interesting to see how burn-in fares over the next year as I continue to use this display primarily for gaming, but with a bit of desktop app usage mixed in. Right now, it's a non-issue and doesn't affect my experience at all. The burn-in I've experienced is very, very minor and very difficult to notice, but it's possible that in a year things will be different, even as I continue to use the display as intended for content consumption and with things like dark mode enabled. While I am loving this monitor, I also probably wouldn't recommend it right now, as there are more QD-OLED options on the market these days, more than the one option when I bought it. I've tested 4 QD-OLEDs so far, and you can see my detailed thoughts on which ones are best in my dedicated video, but if I was buying one now, I'd probably pick the Samsung model instead for my use case. While I did also buy the OLED G8 for testing, and I do still have it, I have no plans on using it for now, as part of me is curious about how the AW3423DW will fare after another year of use. But it is definitely worth considering if you're thinking of jumping into this monitor ecosystem. Anyway, that's it for this one. I talk about my personal gaming monitor and what it's been like using this particular QD-OLED monitor. So I hope all the prospective buyers of not just this particular monitor, but also other QD-OLEDs will get a sense of what it's been like to use this monitor. The things about burn-in and so on will hopefully be useful to some of you. So yeah, if you like this sort of video, please do like the video, consider subscribing to Monitors Unboxed, and also supporting us directly through Patreon or Floatplane. Your support through those places allows us to buy some of these monitors. I mean, I probably would have bought one of these for myself anyway, not using Patreon money, but we've bought things like the OLED G8 for testing. We bought this monitor for testing initially. So yeah, really appreciate all the support we get from you. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.